Now, everyone wants to be the MVP. Everyone wants to be the most valuable, the most important, do the greatest things. But sometimes, before you can become the MVP, you have to be the MIP. Sometimes you have to be the most improved player. Now, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to walk through attributes that will help us become not the most improved player on the court, but the most improved Christian in our lives. Help us become closer to God. Help us become more improved Christians in our day-to-day lives. Today, we're going to look at a biblical example of someone who embraced their past failures, pushed through them, and became a serious candidate for the most improved. Now today we're going to pick up this story of a young boy named John when he was about 15 years old. John lived several hundred years ago, and when we meet him, he's about to meet a celebrity. But not just any celebrity, not an actor, not an athlete, not a politician. This celebrity is more of an activist. Someone who makes people think differently about the disenfranchised, about women, about children, foreigners. But John has a lot of questions about him. Because you see, this celebrity, this activist, well, some government officials love him, and others hate him. Some preachers think he's the greatest person, and others think that he's a heretic, and that he's defying God, and he's just in this for his own gain. And John was taught to respect his government leaders and to respect his preachers, and so he doesn't really know which side he should be on. But today, he's going to get to meet this activist, this celebrity, and he's going to ask him all the questions that have been in his head for months. You see, John's mother is a very wealthy, very important woman, and she's invited this celebrity, this activist, over to the house along with some of his closest friends for a meal. And as the door opens and John hears the footsteps of people coming into the house, he makes a beeline for the door saying, I'm going to ask this man everything that I've been wondering for the past months. I'm going to find out what he's really about. And as he makes a beeline for the door, he sees his mother turn around from exchanging normal pleasantries and say, John, go to your room. They have adult things that they have to discuss. I'm sure they don't need to be bothered by a teenage boy. Go to your room, leave them alone. And John knows better than to cross his mother, so he goes to his room, pouting and stomping all the way. But when he gets in his room, he realizes, wait, they're going to be eating upstairs, right above my bedroom. And the walls in this house are paper thin. I can hear everything they're saying if I'm really quiet. And so he sits in the middle of his room, stays as quiet and as still as possible. He listens to his mother exchange those pleasantries, say, oh, it's so nice to have you over for dinner. Oh, thank you for coming. Can I take your coat? Can I do anything to make you more comfortable? He listens to the men go upstairs, his mother patter into the kitchen to clean up where she'd been cooking throughout the day. And he hears the sounds of eating above him, of utensils scraping on plates. And then as the sounds of eating die down, he hears conversation start up. He hears the low, commanding voice of a practiced public speaker speak about humility, about serving others. And then he hears sort of a low mumble. He couldn't quite make out what the man's saying. And his friends respond with a gasp. And then one of them yells back, betray you? Really? We're your closest friends. And you know that we believe in your mission, so why would we ever turn our backs on you? And that low, strong voice of a practiced public speaker responds one more time, do you have weapons? If not, sell your clothes and buy some. We're going to need them. Oh, you have swords with you? Yeah, that'll do. Come with me. And he heard footsteps coming back down the stairs. Now John panicked and jumped into his bed so that if anyone poked their head through the door, they would think that he was asleep. He heard them walk towards the door, heard his mother's voice, oh, couldn't you stay for dessert? And no, we can't. There's really somewhere that we have to be, but thank you for having us over, Mary. It was a lovely meal. He heard the front door open and close as the men walked out on the street. and his mother run up the stairs to clean up after the meal. Now John had to know where they were going. 15-year-old boys are curious. And so he grabbed the nearest piece of clean clothing he had, really just a bedrobe, tossed it over himself, and ran out into the streets before his mother could notice. He had to know where they were going and what they were doing. Why do they need weapons? And he followed them, block after block, hiding in the shadows, keeping from being noticed, all the way to a garden, a city park in the middle of town. And when he got there, at the gate, this activist turned to his friends and said, "Stay here. I need to pray and clear my head. I'm going to go a little further. You stay here." And he turned and walked into the park. John hid along the hedge line where he was sure no one could see him, and waited, and waited, and waited. And he must have fallen asleep until he was woken up by the sound of metal grating on metal. And in that day and age, the only time that you would hear that noise is when the soldiers were coming. And so John awoke with a start, recognized the noise, and pulled himself even further back into the hedges, into the bushes, to make sure that no one could see him from any angle. And while he was trying to hide himself a little better, he heard a scream. He heard a "ah!" The sound that he hadn't heard for years. The last time he heard that sound was when his cousin had gotten his leg caught underneath a loaded down wheelbarrow and snapped. And so John knew someone was hurt. And someone was hurt bad. So that's the only time that anyone makes a sound like that. And so curiosity once again got the better of him. He stuck his head out of the bushes, and he saw a man standing there, not but a few years older than he was, with a beard, tall, muscular, brandishing a sword, and panting, sweat dripping down his face. There's blood on the sword, but no one was hurt. And John couldn't quite figure out what on earth was going on, but the activist turned around, put his hand on the blade, and lowered it and said, "Now's not the time for that." And he turned to the soldiers, held out his arms, and said, "I know why you're here. I'll go with you." And as the soldiers bound his wrists, the activist's friends turned and ran. And now John's mind was made up. See, the Romans, the soldiers, they were oppressors. They were evil. They were killers. That's what John had been taught. And so if this activist was willing to stand between his friends and these soldiers and save one of their lives, he must be a good man. And if he's a good man, but he's being arrested anyways, well, John had to do something about it. And he didn't know what a 15-year-old boy would do against a squadron of trained killers, but he had to do something. And so he followed the soldiers down the street with their captive activist. He followed them block after block, sticking to the shadows, until he heard one of the soldiers yell, "There!" In the shadows, grab him, and one of them took him by the shoulder, pulled him out into the torchlight, and held him, kind of like you would hold a strange insect in the forest, just kind of, "What are you? What are you doing here?" And as he turned to ask his commander, "Well, what do we do now?" John, kicking and screaming, yelling, "You don't know who my mother is," saw his opportunity and placed a kick right into the soldier's groin. And as the soldier doubled over, still barely holding on, John pulled his arms out of his robe, ducked down, and took off down the street without a scrap of clothing on him. And burying all the fear, all the embarrassment, he sprinted down the street all the way home. He heard the soldiers start after him, but the commander stopped them, yelling, "No, let him go. He's just a boy, and he shouldn't be here anyways." And John thought, that's right. I'm just a boy, and I'm not sure I could help anyway. But that thought gave John no comfort as the soldiers led Jesus of Nazareth away to die. And the next few weeks, well, they were a blur for John. People were in and out of the house constantly, followers of Jesus, sometimes crying, sometimes jumping for joy. And one day, one of these followers was speaking with John, and he pointed out the man from the garden, the one with the sword. He said, "That one, he's seen Jesus. After the Romans executed him, he's seen Jesus, but Jesus is alive. I don't know how, but that man, he's seen him." So John walked up a little sheepishly and said, "Excuse me, sir, I'm sorry, but I don't know your name. But people tell me that Jesus isn't really dead. Is that possible? The Romans killed him. And I know some very high-ranking religious officials that say it's not possible for someone to come back from the dead. They say that you've seen him. Is that true?" The man looked back and smiled and said, "Yeah, it is true. And I don't understand it either, but I've seen him. Oh, and by the way, my name's Simon, but my friends call me Peter. You can call me that if you like. Do you have some time to talk?" So they sat down, and they spoke, and Peter told John as much as he could about Jesus, and they spoke the following day, and the following week, and in the following months, and over the next few years, they grew very close, and Peter told John as much as he knew about Jesus' teachings, about the resurrection, and about being saved from your sins. Years down the line, John had a very unique opportunity to go on a trip. A trip like no one had ever been on before. He would go with his cousin Barnabas and his cousin's friend Paul. As one day, his cousin Barnabas brought him to meet this man, Paul. He was staying just a few blocks away. And John entered the house and saw Paul running about, trying to pack his things, decide what to bring and what to leave. And John walked up to introduce himself, and Paul was a bit gruff. John walked up and said, "Hello, my name's John, I know. You're Mary's son, you're Barnabas' cousin. What are you, 21, 22 now? You'll do." And John asked, well, what do you mean, I'll do? And Paul said, "You'll do. You can make arrangements for places for us to stay, help us baptize when there's too many people for me and Barnabas to handle. You can help us find rides on ships to our next destination. You'll do." And Paul turned to walk away. And as he walked away, he looked back over his shoulder and said, "Oh, by the way, if you're the kind of person that's going to get cold feet, that's going to want to leave halfway through, don't bother getting on the ship. We don't have time for that." And Paul walked into the next room to continue packing his things. As John and Barnabas left, John looked at his cousin and said, "Well, what on earth did I do to him? Why is he so mad at me?" And Barnabas laughed and said, "That's just who Paul is. He lives his life with blinders on. He's only concerned about telling people about Jesus and nothing else. He says anything else is loss. It doesn't matter. If you do well on this mission, he'll like you. And I believe in you, John. I know you'll do great. Come on, we need to finish packing." And they went home, finished packing, and a few days later they took a ship to an island called Cyprus, where John and Barnabas' family were originally from. And they did great things there. John saw demons be cast out, a Roman official become Christian. He even saw a man who pretended to be a magician, pretended to know black arts, be struck blind as a sign from God that he should stop deceiving people and turn to Jesus. John saw amazing things on the island of Cyprus. And then they took a ship back to the mainland to continue this mission. And on that ship, John overheard Barnabas and Paul talking. He heard them talk about Satan, about spiritual warfare, about how they might be imprisoned or beaten, about how they could be even killed for what they were doing. And John was worried. He was scared. Scared like he hadn't been since that night that the soldier pulled him out of the shadows and into the torchlight. And that fear didn't go away. And when they docked just a few days later, his heart beating 100 miles an hour, just like it was that night when he ran all the way home, he saw his luggage sitting on the dock. And as he walked down the gangplank, he grabbed his luggage, turned around and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I'm scared, and I shouldn't be here." And he took off down the dock, knowing he had just enough money to take a ship back to Judea. He heard Barnabas start after him until Paul yelled, "No, let him go. He's just a boy, and he shouldn't be here anyways." And John thought, That's right. I'm just a boy, and I'm not sure that I could help anyway. But that thought gave him no comfort as he sat on a ship back to Judea, knowing that he had abandoned his friends and the mission of God there at that dock. Now we know the rest of the story. We know that Paul and Barnabas would return, that Paul wanted to continue on, do another mission, revisit those churches. We know all that. We also know that Barnabas wanted to bring John with them. That they fought, that they split up their missionary team, and that they would never work together again. But many years later, we see Paul writing to his good friend Philemon on behalf of another friend, Onesimus, a runaway slave. And he says, Mark may be by soon. Make sure you have a room ready for him. John Mark. We see that when he's writing to the Colossians, he hints, well, I might send Mark, John Mark, to visit you soon to help with some of your problems. We see that when Paul is awaiting his execution in Rome, he's writing to his adopted friend, or his adopted son, his friend, Timothy. And he says, come and visit me, come soon, come quickly, and bring Mark with you because I need him. Bring John Mark with you. We don't really know what change of heart took place. But we know at some point John decided, no longer call me John, call me Mark, because Mark is my Roman name, and I'm going to devote my life to bringing the gospel to Romans. So call me Mark, not John. At some point he decided, I'm no longer going to run away. I'm going to embrace danger. I'm going to risk my life for the sake of the gospel. I'm going to do great things for God. I imagine at some point, Paul and John Mark sat down, and the conversation was probably a little awkward. Paul might have looked across the table and said, I've been watching you. I know we haven't talked, but I have eyes and ears in a lot of places, and I've heard amazing things. Mark, you're going by Mark nowadays, right? What changed? And I imagine Mark looked back across the table and smiled and laughed and said, really, the only thing that changed is I chose to no longer run away. I choose every day to improve. And that's a lesson that we get from the life of Mark. That as Christians, we should choose to improve. That as ministers, when we snap at a youth kid that's just been getting on our nerves all day long, we have to choose to improve. Not say, this is just my personality, and I'm just going to keep snapping if they push me that far. But rather say, as a minister, as a Christian, I have to choose to improve. When we are in a fight with our girlfriends, our wives, our fiancés, instead of saying, well, you know what, it's really their fault, we have to choose to improve. We have to choose to give extra grace and be the men that God has called us to be in those relationships. We have to choose to improve. When the tithe plate passes in front of us, instead of just passing it along and saying, well, I'm a college student and I'm poor, we have to put our 10% in and choose to improve. Even though last week we didn't, and we didn't really feel guilty about it, as Christians, every day we choose to improve. That's the lesson we get from the life of Mark. And imagine the world that we could live in if every day we chose to improve. The gospel would be irresistible. It would advance everywhere. And we could be the ministers that help push that forward, that help convince other Christians as well, that the key to all of this is that we choose to improve.